Welcome back again, and today I'm taking you through the rise and fall of Kenya Bus Service, the king of Nairobi roads. Before Nairobi became a city of colorful matatus, before buses had giant speakers, before conductors shouted, "Tao, Tao, Tao, tunatoka sasa," and then waited for another 20 minutes for the vehicle to fill. That was a company that ruled Nairobi's roads. Its buses carried workers to offices, children to school, families to the city, and thousands of residents to nearly every major corner of Nairobi. For decades, Kenya Bus Service was not just another transport company. It was the backbone of urban transport. It represented order. It represented reliability. And for many Nairobi residents, it represented a time when boarding a bus did not require negotiating with the conductor as if you were buying land. But today, the giant that once dominated Nairobi's roads is no longer the powerful company it used to be. So, what happened? How did Kenya Bus Service begin? Who brought the first organized bus service to Nairobi? What role did the colonial government and Nairobi authorities play? How did the company grow into a transport giant? And how did the rise of matatus, political decisions, competition, financial pressure, and changing ownership slowly weakened the company? This is the story of Kenya Bus Service, the company that once moved in Nairobi and the giant that lost its crown. To understand the Kenya Bus Service, we must first understand Nairobi. Nairobi began as a railway settlement in the late 19th century during the construction of the Uganda Railway. The railway transformed the area. Business began to grow. Government offices were established. Workers arrived. Commercial activities increased. And Nairobi gradually developed from a railway depot into an important colonial administrative and commercial center. But as the town expanded, people needed a reliability way to move from one part of the city to another. At the time, transport was very different from what we know today. Many people walked. Some used bicycles. Others used private motor vehicles. There were taxis and other forms of transport, but Nairobi did not yet have a larger organized urban bus system. Imagine living in Nairobi at that time. No matatus, no mobile money, no route groups on social media, no conductor shouting, "Kasarani, Kasarani, hii ni direct." And definitely no passenger asking, "Mbona fare imepanda na mvua ilisimama jana?" The city was growing and its transport needs were becoming more serious. By the early 1930s, Nairobi needed a structured public transport system. In 1934, formal urban bus transport began in Nairobi. The bus operation was established by a London-based overseas transport company, commonly known as OTC. The company brought organized bus operations into a growing colonial city that needed a dependable public transport system. The new operation became the foundation of what would later be known as Kenya Bus Service. Historical accounts described the early fleet as small. The company began with approximately 13 buses serving around 12 routes, although some accounts of the earliest Nairobi bus operation refer to as even smaller initial service. The important point is this: the organized bus system started modestly. It did not begin with hundreds of buses. It began with a small fleet and a major ambition: to connect Nairobi through scheduled public transport. Some of the earliest service served areas such as Pangani, Shauri Moyo, and Dagoretti Corner. At the time, these areas were very different from the busy neighborhoods we know today. Some roads were rough and dusty. The city was much smaller, and many of the estates that would later become major residential areas had not yet developed. Yet, the demand for transport was growing. The buses gave workers and residents a new way to move around the city. During its first year, the new bus service carried hundreds of thousands of passengers. That was an important sign. Nairobi was ready for organized public transport. The buses were not simply vehicles, they were part of the city transformation. When Kenya Bus Service began operating, Kenya was still under British colonial rule. The country was known as the Colony and Protectorate of Kenya. Nairobi was governed through colonial administrative structures. The governor was the highest-ranking British official in the colony. In 1934, the governor of Kenya was Sir Joseph Aloysius Baini. The colonial government controlled major policies, infrastructure, and public administration. At the local level, Nairobi was managed by municipal authorities. The city's administration was very different from today's Nairobi County government. The political system was not based on the same democratic structure that Kenya uses today. Most Africans did not have equal political representation. Important decisions about urban planning, roads, land, and public services were largely controlled by the colonial authorities. This was the environment in which the new bus company began operating. The company was not created by an ordinary Kenyan entrepreneur. It was part of a wider British transport business operating within a colonial economy. The company received permission and operating arrangements that allowed it to provide organized passenger transport in Nairobi. For many years, Kenya Bus Service enjoyed a dominant position in the city's formal bus transport sector. In simple terms, it had something many modern buses would love: a larger market, limited formal competition, and a growing city full of people who needed transport. That was a powerful business position. As Nairobi grew, Kenya Bus Service grew with it. The city expanded beyond its original center. New residential areas developed. More workers traveled to offices, industries, and commercial centers. The demand for public transport increased. Kenya Bus Service expanded its routes and fleet. Its buses became familiar sights across Nairobi. The company connected residential areas to the city center. It transported office workers in the morning. It carried shoppers during the day. And in the evening, it returned thousands of tired residents to their homes. For many people, the bus became part of daily life. The journey was organized around recognized routes and bus stops. Passengers waited at designated stages. They boarded the bus, they paid their fare, and they traveled. There was no need to chase a moving vehicle. There was no need to hang on the door. And nobody had to listen to a conductor shouting, "Kawa wili, hakuna space ya hewa." The system had structure. The buses followed established routes. The company had trained drivers, conductors, mechanics, inspectors, and administrators. It operated workshops and maintained its vehicles. This was a major formal transport business. The company created employment and helped support Nairobi's economic growth. As the city expanded, Kenya Bus Service became increasingly important. For many years, it was the most visible and dominant public transport company in Nairobi. However, the history of Kenya Bus Service cannot be separated from the colonial system in which it was created. Colonial Nairobi was a divided city. Residential areas were organized according to racial and social policies. European, Asian, and African communities experienced the city differently. Access to housing, employment, and services was unequal. Access to housing, employment, and services was unequal. Transport also operated within this wider system. As Nairobi expanded, more African workers traveled into the city to work in industries, government departments, shops, and private businesses. The demand for affordable transport grew. Kenya Bus Service helped meet part of that demand, but public transport also reflected the inequality of the time. The city was not designed equal for everyone. Many African workers lived far from their workplaces. Long journeys became part of daily life. For workers, the bus was not a luxury, it was a necessity. It connected people to employment and economic opportunity. And as more people depended on the service, the company's importance continued to grow. In 1963, Kenya gained independence. The country entered a new political era. Jomo Kenyatta became Kenya's first prime minister and later the first president of the republic. The new government faced major challenges. It had to build institutions, expand education, develop structures, develop infrastructure, create employment, and manage rapidly growing towns and cities. Nairobi continued to expand. More Kenyans moved into the city. New estates developed. The demand for public transport increased rapidly. Kenya Bus Service continued operating during this transition. The company remained one of the most important transport providers in Nairobi. Its buses carried people through a city that was changing politically, economically, and socially. But the company was also operating in a new environment. The colonial system was ending. Kenya institutions were taking greater control, and the country was beginning to create a new economic opportunities for local entrepreneurs. This would eventually change the transport industry. Over the decades, the ownership and management of Kenya Bus Service changed. The original operation was associated with the London-based Overseas Transport Company. Later, the company came under the management of United Transport International, UTI. The business continued to operate as a major urban transport company. The Nairobi City Council also became involved through shareholding and agreements connected to the operation of the public transport. For many years, Kenya Bus Service maintained a strong position in the market. But by the 1990s, a major change was coming. The company that had once faced limited formal competition was about to encounter a new and powerful rival, the matatu. Matatus had already begun operating in Kenya before they were formally legalized. The word matatu is commonly linked to the old fare of 3 10-cent coins. These small passenger vehicles were flexible and privately owned. They could serve routes that were not always well covered by large buses. In 1973, during the presidency of Jomo Kenyatta, the government legalized matatu operations. The decision opened the transport sector to more private operators. For passengers, this created more choices. For entrepreneurs, it created business opportunities. For Kenya Bus Service, it created a competitor that would eventually transform the entire industry. At first, the matatu may have appeared small compared with the Kenya Bus Service. The bus company had a larger fleet. It had workshops. It had established routes. It had decades of experience. The matatu was smaller, but it had advantages. It could move quickly. It could enter narrow roads. It could adjust routes. It could respond to passengers' demand faster. And it had lower operating structures than a larger formal bus company. The matatu industry grew rapidly. More vehicles entered the market. More routes were created. And more competition increased. Kenya Bus Service was still powerful, But the ground beneath it was beginning to change. Despite the growth of matatus, Kenya Bus Service continued to enjoy many successful years. Its buses remained important across Nairobi. The company had an established network. It had experienced employees. It had workshops and maintenance system. It had recognizable routes. And it had a reputation built over decades. Many Nairobi residents remember the buses as organized and dependable. Passengers could identify routes and wait at known bus stops. The buses were larger and could carry many people. For workers and students, Kenya Bus Service was part of everyday life. Some people remember traveling to school in these buses. Others remember going to the city with their parents. For many, the bus represented a more orderly Nairobi. But we should not romanticize everything. The old buses also had problems. Some were crowded, some were delayed, some broke down, and sometimes you could wait at the stage for so long and you began wondering whether the bus had changed the career and became a tractor. Still, compared with the increasingly competitive matatu environment, Kenya Bus Service represented stability. It was a giant, but giants can become slow. And in business, being big is not always the same as being flexible. By the 1980s, matatus had become a major part of Kenya's public transport system. The industry created employment. Vehicle owners earned income. Drivers and conductors found work. Mechanics, garages and spare parts businesses benefited. Matatus became more than transport. They became part of Kenya culture. Their music became louder. Their design became more colorful. Their conductors became more creative. A conductor could see one passenger walking from nearly half a kilometer away and immediately announce, "Hii ndio gari yako. Hii ndio gari yako." The passenger had not even decided whether they were going, but the conductor had already planned the journey. Matatus were flexible. They could change their operations quickly. They could focus on busy routes. They could leave when full. And they could compete aggressively for passengers. Kenya Bus Service operated differently. It had large buses, more employees, higher maintenance cost, more structured operations, and a business model designed for a different era. The matatu industry was becoming faster and more adaptable. Kenya Bus Service was beginning to look like an old giant competing in a new game. In 1980s, another government-supported transport project entered the scene. During the presidency of Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, the Nyayo Bus Service was introduced. The project was associated with the Nyayo era and was intended to provide organized transport services. Nyayo Bus Service expanded quickly and operated in Nairobi and other urban areas. For a time, it appeared that the government-backed operation could become an important player, but the company faced operational and financial difficulties. Its rapid growth did not guarantee long-term success. By the mid-1990s, Nyayo Bus Service had largely disappeared. Its story became another lesson. In transport, buying buses is not enough. You must maintain them. You must manage costs. You must build a reliable system. And you must survive competition. A bus company can have a powerful name, but the engine still needs fuel. In 1991, the British transport company Stagecoach acquired the major overseas ownership interest in Kenya Bus Service. Stagecoach was a larger and experienced transport company. The arrival of Stagecoach brought hope that Kenya Bus Service would be modernized and strengthened. The company invested in buses. It introduced new services. It expanded parts of the fleet. And perhaps most memorably, it brought modern double-decker buses back to Nairobi's roads. For many residents, the double-decker buses were impressive. They were large, they were modern, and sitting upstairs gave passengers a different view of the city. For some children, sitting on the upper deck was almost receiving a free Nairobi tour. Stagecoach also introduced the faster and more modern services. The company hoped to compete effectively with matatus, but the market had changed. The company was facing challenges that new buses alone could not solve. Stagecoach brought experience and investment, but Kenya's transport market was different from the company's traditional markets. The matatu industry was highly competitive. Many operators had lower costs. They could change routes quickly. They could focus on profitable areas, and they did not always operate under the same structure cost as a larger bus company. Kenya Bus Service had to pay employees, maintain workshops, repair large buses, purchase spare parts, manage administration, and keep its fleet operating. The company also faced traffic congestion as Nairobi grew. Roads became crowded. Long delay reduced efficiency. A bus that spent hours in traffic completed fewer trips. Fewer trips meant less revenue. But fuel, salaries, and maintenance costs continued. The company was also affected by regulatory and administrative challenges. Competition was intense, and the transport environment was becoming increasingly different for a larger formal operator. Stagecoach had invested in the company, but investment alone could not remove the deeper problems. In 1998, Stagecoach sold Kenya Bus Service to a group of Kenyan investors. The return to local ownership created hope. Many believed that Kenyan investors would understand the local transport market better. The company returned to operating under the Kenya Bus Service identity, but the new owners inherited a difficult situation. The company was competing with thousands of matatus. Operating costs were very high. Many buses were aging. The transport market had changed, and the company no longer enjoyed the dominance it had. The new owners attempted to keep the business alive, but the challenges were enormous. The company had once been the undisputed giant. Now it was fighting to remain relevant. During the late 1990s and the early 2000s, Kenya Bus Service continued to lose ground. The company reduced the operations. Some buses were taken off the road. Routes became less frequent. The fleet declined. Passengers increasingly relied on matatus and other private operators. The company faced financial difficulties. The cost of maintaining large buses remained high. Competition continued, and the old buses model struggled to survive. By 2005, the original Kenya Bus Service operation had effectively collapsed. The company that had once carried generations of Nairobi residents was no longer the powerful transport giant it had been. Its decline was gradual. There was no single day when every bus disappeared. The fall happened over years. One challenge followed another. Competition increased. Costs grew. Ownership changed. The city expanded. The transport market transformed, and the company slowly lost the position it had held for decades. The giant had fallen. It is easy to say that matatus killed the Kenya Bus Service, but the full story is more complicated. Matatus were a major source of competition. They changed the transport market. They offered flexibility. They reached areas that larger buses did not always serve. They created employment and business opportunities. But Kenya Bus Service also faced other problems. The company had higher operating costs. Its fleet required expensive maintenance. Traffic reduced efficiency. Ownership changed several times. The company struggled to adapt to a rapidly changing market. The transport sector also lacked a fully integrated system that could balance large buses and smaller vehicles. Instead of one coordinated network, many operators competed for passengers. The result was a transport system that became highly fragmented. Therefore, the fall of Kenya bus service was not caused by one enemy. It was the result of changing economics, competition, policy decisions, management challenges, and rapid growth of Nairobi. Although the original Kenya Bus Service Company collapsed, the name did not completely disappear. A new business model emerged under Kenya Bus Service Management Limited. Instead of owning and operating every bus directly, the company developed a management approach in which privately owned fleets could operate and organize the system and branding. The model was associated with the transport executive who had experience studying and working in the transport sector. The new operation attempted to apply lessons from modern bus management. However, the Nairobi transport industry had already changed. Private bus companies and matatu circles had become major players. Companies such as City Hopper and other operators expanded. New technologies also entered the sector. Electronic ticketing became more common. Digital payment changed how passengers paid fares. Modern buses introduced improved comfort and safety features. The city also started discussing and developing bus rapid transit systems. The transport industry was moving into a new era, but the memory of Kenya bus service remained. Today, Nairobi faces transport challenges that are very different from those of 1934. The city has grown from small colonial town into a major African capital. Millions of people travel every day. Transport congestion affects businesses and workers. Public transport remains essential. The city now has more vehicles, more routes, and more transport operators. But some of the questions remain the same. How can Nairobi provide affordable transport? How can passengers travel safely? How can buses operate on reliable schedules? How can the city reduce congestions? And how can public transport become organized without destroying the jobs created by the matatu industry? Perhaps the story of Kenya Bus Service offers an important lesson. A city needs more than vehicles. It needs planning. It needs reliable infrastructure. It needs clear regulations. And it needs a transport system that can adapt as the population grows. Kenya Bus Service was more than a transport company. It was part of Nairobi's history. For more than 70 years, for older Nairobi residents, the buses bring back memories. Memories of school uniforms, morning journeys, trips to the city, long queues, busy stages, and a Nairobi that looked very different. The company may have lost its dominance, but its contribution cannot be erased. Its buses helped build the city, and its story remains one of the most important business stories in Kenya's history. The fall of Kenya Bus Service reminds us that no business is guaranteed to remain successful forever. A company can have history, it can have assets, it can have a famous name, it can dominate an industry for decades. But if the market changes, the company must change too. Kenya Bus Service once ruled Nairobi's roads. Today, its story lives mainly in photographs, memories, and the history of Kenya's transport industry. But one question remains. If Kenya Bus Service had adapted faster, could it still be one of the largest transport companies in East Africa today? Or was the rise of the matatu too powerful to stop? Tell us in the comments. Did you ever travel in a Kenya Bus Service bus? What do you remember about the old Nairobi bus system? And do you believe Nairobi's transport was more organized before the modern matatu era? If you enjoyed this documentary, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications, because here we uncover the stories behind Kenya's biggest companies, how they started, how they became giants, and what happened when everything changed. This was the rise and fall of Kenya Bus Service, the giant that once moved Nairobi.